Good morning, my dear students. I warmly welcome all of you on behalf of AAT Sri Lanka. In our webinar series, today we have allocated for the level 1 students. We are doing today business environment subject. Today we have planned to do a session on business environment and its effect on business organization. We have invited a famous lecturer, Mr. Chamar Prematilaka. He is a CIMA member and he is having postgraduate degree on business management and MBA in University of Colombo. Mr. Chamar Prematilaka, over to you to start the session.
Good morning, everyone. And as we gave introduction about today's session, so we are going to conduct a session for business environment subject. And so in that subject, we are going to talk about and discuss the second chapter, which is business environment and its effect on business organization. So now before we start the detailed explanations, I'm going to give you a brief introduction to the chapter. So the business environment, we have to give a higher contribution or considerations about the business environment when we are learning business management. Now here, the business environment is a set of forces that makes a direct or indirect impact, either favorably or adversely, on the operations of business. When we are doing business, we have to operate, or we are operating our business in an environment. So this environment includes direct and indirect impacts, and also it has favorably and adversely effects on the operations of a business. Now, if we want to continue our business effectively and efficiently, and we need to give a higher consideration on these changes that are happening in the environment. And also, in order for us to compete with our competitors and understand customers' requirements effectively, we have to have a very good understanding about what's happening in business environment. So basically, in this chapter, what we are going to discuss is study how these environments affect or impact business operations. And also we need to give a higher consideration on what is business environment, and we need to define and we need to first understand what business environment is, and then we need to understand the components which include in the business environment. And then we need to see how these business environment or components of business environment impact the operations of the business. So, and also finally, we are going to discuss some tools that we can use to analyze the business environment. So now, if I take a look at today's content that we are going to discuss here, as I explained. So first, we are going to understand and define what is a business, and then the next topic is the business environment, and then we are going to classify business environment, and this is a very famous and often we use these classifications to classify business environment, and we identify two main components in business environment, that is internal and external. And the external environment can be divided into task and macro. And then again, we discuss tools, widely used tools to analyze different components in the business environment. So those are PESTLE analysis, stakeholder analysis, and SWOT analysis. So this is the content that we are going to discuss in today's sessions. So now let's start the session by understanding the definitions of a business. So now usually we say a business is an open system. So why we say business is an open system is because according to the system approach, a business defined as an open system that comprises of set of subsectors and interact with the external environment for its survival. So system is something that we take input from one side and put all these inputs into a process, and then take an output of that process. So when now this is now when we look at this system, now what we can see is usually we all take all these inputs from the environment. That is one aspect of a system, and the other thing, we put all these output into an environment again. So now when we talk about businesses, so there is a big connection between the environment it operates. So therefore, when we say a business, we consider it as an open system where it has a direct relationship with the environment it operates in. So accordingly, a business can be recognized as a system that gets inputs from external environment and provides output to the external environment. So usually we say if a business doesn't take all these environment factors into consideration, that business will not be able to survive in the market, or will not be able to provide what customers actually need, right? So in order for a business to be successful in fulfilling customer demands and requirements, so that business has to have a very good understanding about these environment change, about these changes or trends in terms of consumer behavior and customers' purchasing habits, and all these trends a business has to understand and give consideration for those things. So in order for a business to do that, so they have to have an understanding about these changes. So that's why we are studying this chapter or this module, this section in this subject, to effectively continue or conduct our business. So that is the definitions for a business. And then now let's take a look at what is business environment. So why we need to study this business environment is because, according to the previous definition, business is an open system and it has a direct connection or relationship with the environment it operates in. Why? Because it takes inputs from the outside, and also it puts these outputs into the environment as well. So it directly deals with the environment it operates in. So now if you look at definitions about business environment, or what we mean by business environment. So business environment is an environment that makes an influence on business activities. So because we operate our business in an environment, so what's happening in that business environment directly impact your business activities or business operations. Accordingly, a business environment is a set of all factors that influence the existence and operations of the business. So the factors and all considerations that are included in business environment influence the existence. Now, whether we survive or whether we exist in this market or to our operations, it directly impacts, right? So we consider all these factors that has an influence on business operations and its existence as business environment. So as I explained in the content, we can classify the business environment into subsectors. Okay, so business environments are classified in different way. So this is one of the prominent method that we use to classify business environment. Okay, so according to this classification, business environment can be mainly first classified and categorized into two environments, which are internal environment and external environment. So now, according to the definition, according to the discussion, and according to the explanation that I gave you, so we understood that all these factors that influence the existence of a business, we consider business environment. Okay, so now here these factors can influence from both ways, internal and external. Now if some factors or if few factors impact on business or influence and business internally inside the organization, we consider them as internal environment, right? So internal, when the when we look at the term itself, it gives an idea what kind of environment that is, right? It is internal. So when we say internal, it is inside the organization. So we look at the factors and influences inside the organization. So that is internal environment. And the other one, so outside the organization, that is called external environment. Okay, so mainly we can understand these two categories, and then external environment, then again we can categorize into two parts, which is task environment and macro environment. Now when we say task environment is the closest environment to the internal environment, right? So when you look at outside the business, you will first see the activities in the task environment, and then again the broader environment, outer line, is the macro environment, where all these macro environment factors include PESTLE factors, we say, right? So this is the basic classification and categorization of business environment. So now today lesson basically focuses on each and every environmental categories, and we are going to explain each of these environment types, and then I'm going to explain you, and I'm going to tell you how these different environment influence your business operations, and how we can understand the impact or influence of these different environmental factors, right? So moving on, now let's start from internal environment. So as I explained at the beginning, so internal environment is a collection of factors within a business that affect on operations of a business. So if there are any factors that influence or impact for business inside the organization, and those factors come from inside the organization, we consider them as internal factors or internal environment. So internal environment can be considered as factors that are controllable to managers within the scope of the business environment. So since these these environmental factors are inside our organization, now we say we can control them to a certain extent, right? Because managers, those factors are under the control of managers, and therefore managers can control those factors. So basically internal environment variables are as follows. So one is the value system, organizational culture, management structure, and human resource. So value system, I will explain one by one. So these are the factors that are coming under the internal environment of an organization. So the value system, now if you look at any organization, business organization, we can find or we can figure out some a system of values. Actually, they believe and they strongly recognize certain values of an organization. So this value system entirely we call as value system, right? So if you want to study the beliefs and all these values that we can see in an organization, we need to analyze that business value system. Okay, that's where we can see all these points. And also the other thing, organization culture is include all these customs and beliefs and things that we take from our previous maybe generations, or maybe the people who started the organization and established the organization. So every organization has their own culture, right? Sometimes this culture influence the operations positively, sometimes it influences negatively. So we need to understand instances where it influenced positively and it influenced negatively. So if it has any negatives that impact an operations of business, we need to correct them. Okay, so the management structure. Now, when we say a business organization, it has it includes many tasks and many activities. So in order to do these different activities, there should be a proper guideline, there should be a procedure, and there should be an allocation of work, and this person should do this one, and that person likewise. There should be a proper allocation. So that allocation we can see from the management structure of the organization, right? So once we identify different tasks of an organization, we need to allocate and divide among different employees and people in the organization. So that structure can be seen in the management structure. And also the other aspect that are included in the internal environment of an organization is the human resource. Now, human resource is the number of people who are involved in the operation and the continuous and functions of business, right? So that is one aspect. That is another aspect of the internal environment. So basically, if we want to analyze the internal environment of an organization, we need to look at, now there are many factors, but you can look at these aspects as well in order to get an understanding about the position or the nature of your organization's internal environment. So I will tell something which is important, which is very important when we analyze in this business environment. So when we have to develop strategies for an organization, and when we have to develop a new product, or maybe when we have to go to a new market or new geographical area, we have to consider all these aspects, right? So from one side, we need to analyze our internal environment in order to identify what are the strength we have and what are the weaknesses we have. And then again, we need to analyze the external environment to identify the opportunities and threats, right? So in that process, before we look at, like when we look at the outside, now we need to look at our inside as well, right? So when we analyze the external environment, we identified certain opportunities and threats. At the same time, we need to look at ourselves inside our organization and see whether we have, or what kind of strength we have and what kind of weaknesses we have, right? So in order to identify these variables and factors, we have to do these different environment analysis. So that is one purpose of analyzing your environment, analyzing the business environment, right? So we gave now if I just summarize what we discussed so far, and first I gave definitions for business. Now we said business is an open system where it has connections with the external environment and the internal environment. Usually it has a direct relationship with the external environment, where it takes inputs and also it puts these outputs into the environment. So therefore it has a direct relationship with the environment, since a business is an open system. So then we talk about what is business environment, right? So business environment actually talk about all these factors that influence the existence and operations of a business. And then we talk about classifications of business environment, and the ways that we can classify business environment into different parts, right? There we identified mainly two parts: business environment, that is external and internal. And then I told you external environment can be further divided into two sub environment, that is task environment and macro environment. So now we are discussing about the internal environment of the organization. Okay, so it includes all these internal factors that you can see in the screen right now. the value system, organization culture, management structure, and human resources, and all these aspects. So then again, then I told you why we need to analyze these different environment. So the reason for that is because we need to, when we understand, or when we have to understand the internal strength and weakness and capabilities, and where we are, where we stand in the market, what is our position, right? So in order to understand all these things, we need to do an internal environment analysis. And to find out all these external opportunities and threats, and then other variables, and how it impacts your business, you have to do the external environment analysis. So that is what we discussed so far. And then I'm going to next environment. I'm going to explain that part, that is external environment. So first take a look at and see what external environment is, and then let's see how it impacts and what components and variables include in the external environment. Okay, so external environment of business is a collection of factors which indirectly influence and emerge out of the scope of an organization management. So external environment consists of task and macro environment. Basically, outside an organization, if there are factors that influence an organization, so we consider and we call them as external environment factors or external environment. And then again, this external environment can be divided into two parts. So the closest environment to the organization is the task environment, right? So right after your internal environment, so what you can see is the task environment. So that is outside, but it is very close to your organization. But macro environment is not like that. It is not within our control, and it is large, and it's difficult to control, and most of the time we have to adapt and we have to change and adjust our strategies according to them. So likewise, it's that environment is considered as macro environment. So basically, now what you need to understand, and the other thing that I need to tell you. So first take a look at these task environment. So task environment is the closest environment to the internal environment, but still it is in the external environment. So task environment include these variables, right? So these factors include, like we understood and identified some variables and factors in the internal environment. So likewise, we can identify some factors in the task environment as well. So task environment include all these customers, suppliers, competitors, manufacturers of substitute products, and potential competitors. Now, if I give you a brief about all these factors separately, so customers are actually the one who buys or purchase goods and services from us. Okay, so customers, and customers play a major role in terms of the operations and continuous of our business. And suppliers are the one who provide raw materials, maybe like some product parts and components and all these things for us to develop a product or a service. Okay, so those are the suppliers. And then competitors are the one who produce the same product and services, right? So, and those are the competitors. And then manufacturers of substitute products. Now, similar products, actually substitute product, rather similar substitute. Now we can use a product instead of that product. So that is substitute, and there are some manufacturers of substitute products as well. So those are also coming under the task environment. And then potential competitors are the one who will become competitors, like future, or maybe they are about to become a competitor for us. They're going to start a new business, right? That's what we call potential. they will become competitors in maybe future likewise. So those are the components that we can basically discuss under the task environment. Okay, so task environment, we can see these components. Okay, so and then now the other thing that I need to tell you, when we categorize and classify these different environment, so basically the internal environment and task environment together we call micro environment. Now at the very beginning I gave you an explanations about the internal environment, and then I told you that the closest environment next to the internal environment is the task environment, and together these two environments we call micro environment. Okay, so micro environment includes, now you can see here, micro environment includes all forces which connect and close to the business. A business can control factors of a micro environment to a certain level. Why? Because this one is very important. Why we can control to a certain level or to a certain extent is because it is very close, and it is very close to our business. It's just like internal environment, right next to internal environment. So internal and task environment are the parts of micro environment. So therefore we call those two environment together micro environment. Okay, so these same aspect actually I discussed previously. So intermediaries and then the customers, competitors, related parties, and trade unions. So intermediaries, and if I just give you a brief about that part, intermediaries, when we are going to deliver a product to a customer, and all these parties involving between producer and the customer are called intermediaries, right? So now when you talk about the distribution channel, and when we are going to make our products available to customers, so then we need to include these different intermediaries in between us and the customer, right? So those are also coming under the micro environment. All right, so so those are the environment that we can discuss so far, and then we are going to talk about the other most important environment, which is macro environment, and this takes a large portion of the environment, external environment, right? So macro environment, a wide range of environment of business and influencing forces connecting with them are called the macro environment, right? These factors are consisting of external forces that influence the operations of a business, right? Now, so far we talk about the forces that are coming in from inside the organization and then very close to the organization. So those are the internal and task environment. Together we call them micro. And now we are going to talk about the factors that influence from the external environment. Okay, so factors are consisting of external forces coming from the external side that influence the operations of a business. All these factors influence the business and the operations of the business. We can't say those are impacting a business only from negative side, right? So it has both sides. Sometimes a change or force that's happening in the external environment impact or influence the business negatively. Sometimes it will influence or impact positively. So we can't always say that all these factors are negative or positive, right? It changes time to time, and the way it impacts, and it happens actually, right? So macro environmental factors are beyond the control of a business, right? So we can't control a macro environment. So that's why we have to have a very good understanding. I'm reiterating the same thing. So we need to have a very good understanding these environmental forces. Why? Because we can't control them. If we can control, we don't need to give that much of considerations, since they are within our controls. Since they are not within our controls, we have to always be alert with those changes in those environments. And a business should identify changes in the environment in advance, very important, and in advance, and adapt according to the situation. So now we have to be proactive rather reactive. Now we say proactive means we need to take actions, and we need to we need to take precautions before something happens. That is called proactive. And if we do something and if we take actions once something is happened, that is reactive. So understanding all these changes in advance is proactive approach, right? So that's why we say, now once a change happens and after it happens, if we get to know about it, now we are too late. So all these changes we have to understand in advance. All right, so let's take a look at what includes in these macro environment, right? So these are the factors: uh, political and legal environment, so one aspect in the macro environment, and the economic environment, and social and cultural environment, so technological environment, natural environment, demographic environment, and global environment. So when we are doing a business, so we need to understand the changes in each and every environment, right? And by understanding, so now the thing that I need to highlight here is just understanding is not sufficient, right? So now let's say, for example, a businessman is fully aware about the changes that's happening in each and every environment, but he doesn't know and he doesn't consider about the impact of these environment. Now let's say, for example, political environment, we know that a certain policy is about to change, but we don't take any further actions on it. Just understanding and awareing is not sufficient. Now we need to see how it affects, how it impacts your business. What is the influence of these changes to your business, right? So that's why we need to understand these different environments. So those are the environment, and I'm going to give you a brief about each and every environment separately. So if you take political and legal environment, so you can see in the slide here, the influence of political movement in a country on business is considered as political environment, right? Establishing and executing laws and policies by compiling, executing agencies are considered under the legal environment, right? So now when you're doing business, the political situation in a country is very important, right? So because all these business operations are functioning smoothly, provided that the country has a stable political environment. If there are changes in the regime and the government continuously, a continuous policy will not be remain in the country. The policies and procedures will be changed continuously. When things are changed, actually we can't do business in a continuous manner, right? We have to change the rules and procedures and regulations and all the way we do business. So it's not healthy for a business to continue change these policies and all these things continuously. So for that we need a stable political environment, right? So now let's say, for example, why we need to analyze this environment, another importance, as I explained you. Let's say we are going to go to another country to start a business. Now let's say we go to Malaysia, and then we need to see at this moment, or maybe like within next 2-3 years, what will be the political situation of that country. And if it is not good or healthy, we need to see, and we need to see what kind of action we can take to avoid these threats and impacts, right? So that's one example to say why we study these things in detail. And so under the political environment, we basically discuss these parts: political structure, right? Political policies, political parties and political stability, functions of government agencies. Now, if you look at political policies, so some government actually, now if I tell you one example, some political parties actually, they focus on, they allow imports, okay, and then some countries actually, they don't like, some government, they don't motivate imports, and they focus on export driven economy, and some import, they don't focus much on export aspect, export driven economy. So things like that. The factors like these we need to take into consideration when talk about the political environment. And then an economic environment consists of all economic variables, purchasing power with regard to the existence of business, and we need to see the wages level and amount, policies related to salaries and wages, and now let's say basic economic conditions like inflation rate, per capita income, cost of living, national product, interest rate. So why we need to understand these variables, I'm going to explain this in the next slide. Now, if you take a look at this slide, now you can see I have highlighted and some of the variables that are coming in the economic environment and how it affects the business as well. Right now, let's say inflation. So when inflation rate is high, it's actually increased cost of operations. When the raw material prices increases and the price goes up, and it affects our operational cost. Why? Because raw material prices are increased and our cost of production is also increased, and especially raw material, power and energy and labor, and also profits can be condensed by lower the demand, which occurs as a result of increasing cost of products. So when the cost of production goes up and increases, so it will impact to the price of the products as well. So when the price increases, it will impact to the demand of the product. So customers will demand less. Why? Because the price is high. So when the demand decreases, it impacts our profits as well. Right? So that's how these variables impact our businesses. Now let's say the other one, rate of interest. And interest rate, why we need is because now when we are doing business, we need some immediate cash requirements, right? So for that, we call them working capital requirements, right? So when we do our business day-to-day basis, we need to take loans from banks, right? So when, or maybe like not only continuing our business, sometimes before we start, sometimes we need some initial capital in order for us to start a business. So if the interest rates are high, then our cost of capital is also high, right? So that is also one aspect that we need to consider when analyzing the business environment. Okay, so then likewise taxes, and I have explained, you can read these slides in detail to get a better understanding. When the tax are changed, actually profits are restricted due to the imposition of direct tax, and demand become lower as a result of the increase in prices, the same thing that we explained, and required to calculate taxes and all these things, maintain tax records, and exchange rates also. Price of goods which are import can be increased as a result of depreciating the exchange rate, and the income may increases as a result of receiving higher price for export goods, right? So there are positives and negatives of these changes in these different variables to the operations and existence of business. Okay, so let's talk about the other macro environmental factor, that is social and cultural environment. So when we are doing a business, society and culture, understanding the changes in the cultural and social environment is also very important. Now, let's say, for example, why we need to understand these different cultures sometimes. Now, we can't see like totally different cultures like that has a large difference, right? Huge differences. But if you look at countries to countries, you can see different cultures. Okay, so now Western, we have an Asian countries and Western countries and European markets are different, right? So one aspect that has an impact in large is this cultural and social environment, right? So maybe the language they speak, and then the religion aspect, all these things impact their culture and social status of those countries. So now why we need to study these cultures and social aspect is because these impact their purchasing behavior, right? So now what to purchase and what not to purchase is determined by large extent, is determined by our culture to a large extent, right? So now let's take this explanation. We can see here social and cultural environment comprise of factors which influence for behavior and thinking pattern of human. Factors related to social and cultural environment are personal beliefs, right? Now, personal beliefs, basically, when I'm going to buy a certain product or service, I have my personal beliefs, right? I believe personally that I don't buy these products and I only buy these products or services. Those are my personal beliefs. And values and norms. And norms actually what we consider, and certain norms are there in our society. We say this is that and that is that. Likewise, we believe certain things, right? So based on those things, on we those aspects impact our purchasing behaviors. And also concept, rituals, religions, and credence, and then habits, expectations, and ethics, social norms, attitudes, and all these things impact our purchasing behavior. So that's why we need to understand, study these social and cultural aspects as well. Okay, so the other one, technological environment, which is very, very important nowadays. Why? Because now we are actually in a world where the entire operations are digitalized, right? And things are automated. Customers prefer more on these automated functions and aspects rather looking at manual things. So in this automation world and the process of digitalizing things, so technology plays a major role. Technology plays a key role in digitalizing and digitizing all these manual works, right? So, and the other thing, why we need to have a closer understanding about this technical environment is because customers will not be doing business with us if we don't consider these technological updates into our business. Now, let's say a bank doesn't install these cash deposit machines, and when their competitor does the same thing, and our bank can't implement that, then customers sometimes will have a negative impression and they will say it's difficult for us to wait in a queue, but other banks, they all use these technologies, so why can't you install these things? So now why we need, so it's not good for our brand, and if it's not good for our reputation as well. So in order to provide an updated a service for our customers, we need to have uh, the understanding about these changes. Now, even this example that I just took, so if we don't have sufficient money and we need to see them in advance to allocate the required cost and money for all these investment, right? So now we have to allocate money all of a sudden. Why? Because we were not aware about those changes. If we were aware about those changes in advance, so we can make some what we call locations for those investment in advance, right? So then we will not get stuck due to the capital finding problems and so on and so forth. Okay, so this includes innovations and then research and development, development in information technology and technical issues. Okay, all right. So now if I give you a brief about what we discussed so far, I'm not gonna explain the basic things that we explain at the very beginning, but I'll start the environment classification. So we divided environment into two parts, internal and external, and then internal is all the factors that impact from inside in our organization. So external can be divided into task and macro. Task is the closest environment to the business, and together internal and task we call micro, and then we discuss all these aspects, and then we move into macro, which is the large environment and difficult to control. And the only thing that we have to do is understand them and adapt according to those changes. And I explain all these factors that are coming under the macro environment. All right. So now what we have to do is when we are analyzing these environment in management, basically there are different models and tools we use to analyze these different environments, right? Now one of those tools that we use very often to analyze this environment is PESTLE, right? So PESTLE basically we use, now I just finished discussing the macro environment, and basically we use this tool to analyze the macro environment of a business. Right now, you know the factors and variables that are coming under the macro environment. And now I'm going to tell you the tools that you can use to analyze that environment, right? So PESTLE stands for political, economical, social, technological, and legal and environment analysis. Okay, so you can see here on the slide itself. All business operations are linked with the macro environment. Therefore, all business should be adjusted with the macroeconomic changes through this analysis. The impact on macro environment variables will be evaluated in the PESTLE analysis. Okay, so I'm not gonna give you detailed explanations about these variables separately because we have already discussed all these things, but I'm going to tell you how you can use this tool to analyze your business environment. Okay, so I have given you an example here. Now when we are analyzing all these environmental factors, we can put all these factors into a table like this. Okay, so now let's say from this side, the first column, you can put all these macro factors one by one. Now I have here I have put only the political factors since we don't have much time to explain all these aspects. I have given you an example political factors, and then when we analyzing these factors, the next thing that we need to understand is the driver, right? So drivers and then impact to the organization and whether it's an opportunity or threat, right? Sometimes these changes that are happening in the external environment are always not threats or opportunities. Sometimes it becomes an opportunity, sometimes it becomes a threat, right? So that we need to understand that one as well, and then we need to see whether it's the degree of opportunity or threat, right? Whether it's high or medium or low, right? So the impact, the degree of impact, right? So I'll say there is a change happening in the political environment. Sometimes it doesn't impact your business at all. So then you can say no, low impact, right? Likewise, now I will take one driver here. Drivers are the things that change the political, all this environment, right? Now let's say now let's take technological environment as a macro factor. We can say driver, introductions of new technologies, that is a drive, right? How it impacts. So now let's say introduction of new accounting systems, that is the driver. And then how it affects your business. So we also have to adapt or change those systems and implement in our organization in order to get the maximum out of those things, right? Something like that. Now here, actually, this example is related to hotel industry. Now, one driver, one change that's happening in the political environment is the political stability of the country, right? If there is a political stability in the country, the political stability of the country has created a positive environment for the country's tourism industry. Exactly, right? So if the country has a stable political environment, then it's good for the tourism industry, right? So that is the impact. So it's an opportunity, actually, when the country has a stable political environment. It's an opportunity for us. Why? Because we can further invest money on this industry. It's positive, right? And so since this company is in hotel industry, so that kind of aspects are, the impact is high, right? So likewise, you can all these factors, you have to understand the driver and how it affects your business, impact to the organization, and then whether it's an opportunity or threat, and the degree of impact, whether high, medium, or low, right? So that is an example of PESTLE analysis. And again, the other thing when we have to analyze when you talk about business environment is stakeholders. Okay, so stakeholders are a very important part of any business. Why? Because we can't do a business without stakeholders, right? So now, if I tell you a definition for stakeholders, you can see here. Stakeholders are a group or individuals who have an interest or who are interested in the affairs of an organization, right? So now employees are stakeholders of an organization. Why? Because they are interested. They need to see what's going to happen inside the organization, whether this will company, whether the company will survive in the future, their job security, whether they can work with this company for about like 10-15 years, and whether they can get whether they have opportunities for them to grow in their life, like promotions and all. And so those purposes they are interested. And also now another party, shareholders. Shareholders actually invest money on business, and they need to see whether they get the required profits from that business or not. So in order to see that, they are really interested in the business, right? In the business to see what's happened. So those are the stakeholders, and then we can identify basically different stakeholders, right? So connected, related, and external. Connected operate within the limit of an organization. Related, the other parties operate outside the limit boundaries. And external include government, state organization, and general public, and pressure groups, right? So why we need to understand and analyze the stakeholders of an organization is because stakeholders have different expectations, right? So since stakeholders expectations are different from one to one, we need to treat them separately, right? If every stakeholders have same expectations, we don't need to manage them separately, right? Now let's say, for example, do you treat your like friends, your parents and teachers and all these people you meet and you have connections in your daily life similarly and like? No, you treat them, you don't treat the way you treat your friends to somebody else. I mean, like maybe like your relatives, right? So likewise, even in an organization, people who have an interest with our organization, and they have different expectations from us as well, right? So when they have different expectations, we need to treat them differently. So in order to treat them differently, we need to understand these stakeholders expectations and who are they and what are their expectations and all these things. So that is what we call stakeholder analysis. Okay. So in order to do that, we use a very prominent tool introduced by Mendelov, and that's called, it was introduced in 1991, and that model called, and that matrix called Mendelow's matrix. Okay. And basically, there are two aspects that we consider when it comes to stakeholders. And here Mendelov actually, what he did was, he divided stakeholders into four categories based on two aspects. That is that is power and interest, right? So let's see how he does it and how he has done it. Okay, now you can see on this slide, from the right hand side, you can see the Mendelow's matrix, right? And you can see on that matrix, and now before I explain all these cells differently, I will explain the model first. And you can see on the top of the this image, level of interest, right? That is one aspect that we measure stakeholders, right? So some stakeholders have high interest with our organizations. Some stakeholders have low interest with our organization. They don't need to worry about what's happening inside our organization. So then they have a low interest. But some stakeholders are not like that. They need to really see what's happening in the company, and they are full alert on what's happening in the organization, right? So those we can say high. And on the other side, now stakeholders, one side they are interest, and some actually they have power as well, right? Power means the ability to influence us, control us, right? Some people, some stakeholders, actually they don't have a power at all with them, right? But some stakeholders, they have high power. Why? Because they have the ability to control us, influence us. So those stakeholders, we can say high and low, right? So based on those two criterias, we can categorize these stakeholders. Now let's take one example and explain. So here, if you look at this cell D, right, there we say key players. The reason for that is, now look at here, the level of interest is high, okay, and the level of power is also high, and they have high power. So when there is high power and high interest, now we say, or we call them key players, right? So now if we put any stakeholder into this cell or category, we need to give a closer attention for them. Why? Because they are the key players of our organization. Now you can see here, if you take that cell, the definition which is given here in the slide cell, high powered and highly interested people. Now you can see within the brackets, you have to manage them very closely, right? Aim to fully engage those people, making the greatest efforts to satisfy them, right? So we need to take the maximum efforts to satisfy them. Why? Because they have high power and their interest is also high, right? Likewise, we can categorize stakeholders into four categories based on based on interest and power, right? So that is what we do in the Mendelow's matrix when we are analyzing stakeholders. Okay, so moving on, and the other thing that we need to discuss is SWOT analysis, right? So now what we do in SWOT analysis is basically, once we do the internal and external environment analysis of a business, of an organization, so we need to summarize, we can summarize what we find or what we found out through all these two environments. So we can use this SWOT analysis to find or summarize what we found in those two environment analysis, right? So now basically SWOT stands for strength, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, right? So we can categorize these SWOT into two environments, like it represents two environments. So strength and weakness, like I said previously before at the beginning, represent the internal environment, and opportunities and threats represent the external environment, right? So now you can let's take a look at what these explanations gives us. So SWOT summarizes what we analyze in the external and internal environment, right? So SWOT summarizes what we analyze in the external and internal environment. This analyzes strength, weakness, opportunities, and threats within the business environment. So you can write down these extra notes if you want. So strength and weaknesses are in the internal environment, and opportunities and threats are from the external environment. So here actually in the last point, if a business has sets its objective properly, it is appropriate to use SWOT analysis to achieve those objectives, right? If a business has set its objectives properly, it's appropriate to use SWOT analysis to achieve those objectives. Okay, so now when we are going to achieve our objectives in the organization, we can use this SWOT analysis. Now I'm going to tell you how we can use SWOT analysis. Okay, so here before that I will tell you what we understand and mean by these four categories. Number of skills employees in an organization. If you have skilled employees in an organization, it's a strength for us, right? And weakness, the characteristic of an organization that disrupt to achieve its objectives negatively. Certain things there are inside our organization that disrupt, and that what we call stops us achieving our objectives. Those are called weakness. Maybe use of obsolete manufacturing method, right? We use like outdated expired method of manufacturing. So sometimes when we use like old methods, our outputs are not that good. We have many defects, quality is low, right? So many problems, right? So then it might be a weakness. Now when we have these kind of problems in an organization, it's difficult for us to achieve our objectives. And opportunities are the state that exist in the external environment to create a favorable situation in the market. Now let's say if there's anything positive outside, it's an opportunity for us. Concessions or subsidiaries given by the government is an opportunity for us, right? So when the government, and maybe like now we can take some other examples as well. Say if there are like markets which have not been tapped by any other competitor or when touched by any other competitor, so those are opportunities for us. And threats are actually a status that exists in the external environment, creates an adverse situation in the market. So if anything create negative impact for us is a threat. Maybe competitors introducing same products, it's a threat for us. And government is going to enforce some rules and regulations which is not favorable for us, it may be a threat. And then globalization. So with the globalization, customers demands are changed and preferences are changed and their expectations are high. So we need to provide these changes inside our organization. It's a cost for us sometimes, right? We can't change like all of a sudden these changes. Okay, so now I'm going to show you an example for SWOT analysis as well. So this was done for Apple. You know the company Apple, and specifically for the iPhone brand, right? So now if you look at strength and weakness, here you can find out all these things. Now strength and weakness are internal, right? All these things, and opportunities and threats are outside the organization. Now let's take a look at this and see how we can relate to the selected company. Now brand, now Apple, of course, it has a high brand name, right? Brand value it has. Many people know the brand, and many people like the brand, prefer the brand. That's the brand value they have. And customer loyalty means like customers are waiting to purchase those products, or buy or purchase their product, and they want to like they don't want to go to another brand, and they are stick to Apple, and they always like use those products. That's called loyal customers. And design itself, their design is different from other products, and and right, and it has some unique features where it's different from the rest of the competitors. And of course their apps are very innovative, and maybe like it doesn't support for other operating systems and other mobiles, so those apps are unique, right? So it's different. So those things are the strength, and weaknesses are the negative things actually that this company has. Now price, of course their price is quite high, and because of that they lose some customers. And accessories are also expensive, and no varieties. Now when you compare with other mobile companies, actually they have large varieties. Now in terms of them, they have. And battery, actually it's come up with the, now it's difficult to change and these things. And Steve Jobs is no more there in the company, because he was the one who introduced the company, introduced the product, and all these creations were like his creations. So now the person who invented this is no more with us. So that might be that can be taken as a weakness for this company. So, and opportunities, now smartphone market is growing. Now you know that nowadays you can see with the prevailing situation that you experience in the country. And now everything, actually we do payments online, and we use like mobile, like these days smartphone plays a major role, right? So all these banking transactions and all these purchasing, ordering, and communication, everything we do via mobile phones. So when we live in an environment like that, smartphone market is growing. And dependency on digitization. Now customers and people all over the world uh, depend on digitization, right? So they like move away from these manual thing to digital things, right? And there is a high potential for expansion as well. And accessories, they can introduce new accessories. All these are opportunities for this company. And if you look at threat, Android is a threat, and Samsung is another key player in the mobile phone market. And Apple itself lack innovations. Now, if you take a look at the company's innovation process, now innovations are not that impressive when we compare with the inventions they came at the beginning, right? So innovations we can see because why they have limits in terms of innovations in the company itself. Like there are certain limits that we can we can't say actually there are limits to innovation, but sometimes we have to face that kind of problems as well. Okay, so that is what now this is a summary of all these internal and external positives and negatives. Now you can see on the top of this table, strength and weaknesses are the internal positives and negatives. Internal positives strength, and internal negatives are weakness, and external positives opportunities, and external negatives are threats. All right, so so that is the end of the explanation, right? That is what we have to explain today's session, and I'm going to give you a brief and summary of so far what we discussed. in this presentation. All right, you can see in the content here. So this is what we discussed today. And so this is our business environment subject, and we talk about the second chapter of the business, that subject, that is business environment and its effects on business organization. So here what we are discussing is we define the business environment and see how it impacts, or how it affect our business organizations, right? And what is the effect of that environment to our organization. And under that section, first we define what is a business, and we say that it's an open system where it has connections with the external environment in terms of taking inputs and putting outputs after putting them into a process. And then we define what is business environment. Okay, so then we talk about classifications of business. Now, once you get an understanding about business environment, or what business environment is, then we did a classification of business environment. We classified business environment into different parts. Okay, so based on that, we divide them into internal and external can be further divided into two. That is actually task and macro. So then we talk about some tools that we can use to analyze these environment. That is PESTLE, and a stakeholder is also one part of that analysis. And we use Mendelow's matrix to analyze stakeholders. And also we discuss how to use a SWOT and how to do a SWOT analysis. So these tools and these concepts are very important. Why? Because you have to use not only at this stage, even when you are doing your next stage and your future studies, especially if you are into management and related subjects. So you will have to use these tools very often. And so I think you can get a good understanding and foundation about these concepts from these explanations. So, and for today, we are winding this up and stop the session. And so we will be meeting you with a session like this in this subject, so in times to come and in future days.
Very interested lecture. Mr. Chamara, you explained very well in detail, but in simple way, all subject areas using the practical examples. So I thank Mr. Chamara for your contribution on behalf of AAT Sri Lanka and AAT students. Okay, we will meet another day. Have a nice day. Thank you.